Okay. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you here to hear Moretta Sanderhoff speak on the difficult second date. Moretta is the curator and senior advisor at the Statens Museum for Kunst in Copenhagen. Oh. And
it's
also
your German roots
the founder
shining
of
through.
the Sharing is Caring conference and a board member on Europeana and Open Glam. And without further ado, Moretta.
Thank you. So I called this talk The Difficult Second Date because it's all about how we went on a date with a private funder back in 2008 when we knew very little about digital development projects in my museum. And when that funding period ran out, we had learned a lot and we wanted to go on a second date with this foundation. But the second time around, it turned out to be very difficult. And I'll tell you that story. But first, I want to give credit to Jamie Seebach of IQ Innovations because I've used his artwork to illustrate my entire presentation today. Jamie is from New Jersey. He works in New York City. And he takes pictures of torn up posters in the subway and in the streets of New York, and he remixes those in one of his latest series of collage with public domain images from the SMK Museum. And the reason why I brought this artwork in is because this is actually what we've been trying to obtain funding for and been trying to achieve with our digital development is to spread our collection beyond the walls of our museums and let people do what they feel is great on their terms. So I thought that his work would be a good sort of backdrop for this. So a little bit of background about my museum. We're the National Gallery of Denmark. Our collection contains Western art from the Middle Ages to the present, and we have approximately 260,000 artworks. We have been state-funded since the middle of the 19th century, which makes us a public service institution. So our collection really belongs to the public. We're a social democratic country, and everyone has a share in this. So we are here to serve everyone. So in 2008, when I had just been 1 year at the museum, we went on the first date with Nordeafonden. It was a project called, please come in, a project called SMK Digital, a 5-year development project, and the title pretty much says everything. Just something digital, not very focused, but we wanted to develop and experiment with these new technologies that were all around. The interesting thing is we applied for 22 million Danish kroner, which amounts to a little more than $3 million. But it turned out when we got the grant that the foundation had been willing to give us more than that had we asked. So this was the happy days before the financial crisis, and it felt like this guy on the picture that we just sort of pointed, shot, and hit the target. It was easy. And we felt that Nordea Foundation was a great match for us as this public serving institution because they want to support what they call the good life. So everything they put funding into is to create better conditions for citizens of Denmark to have better access to education, to sports, to doing something good with their leisure time. It didn't feel like just cool cash, but actually something coming from a good background. But when we got this funding, we quickly realized that we were a very immature organization in terms of spending this money in a good way. There was no real understanding of digital within the organization. We didn't have experience with defining and achieving KPIs in digital projects. No real sense of user experience design. We had a very naive approach to engaging users. How do you really go about that? And we didn't have an updated infrastructure or resources in place to actually run this big digital thing we had set out to build, which resulted in the situation where we did all the classic mistakes. We wanted to do everything at once instead of sort of focusing on things that would be viable. We had a very vague definition of target users. Our focus was on products rather than processes. We built shiny things that weren't viable in the long run. We lacked overall management. We had a lot of sub-projects with sub-managers, and they went in each their direction, and there wasn't a lot of coherence there. We had some of the wrong kind of people, very lovely people, but not the right people for the tasks. We spent a lot of money on external consultants where the money just sort of went out of the organization and was lost. We didn't focus on getting the infrastructure in place. So we just built a lot of one-offs, and we failed to ensure operational budget for the things we... Okay, so you see where I'm getting at. And then also, just the stuff that happens in a project period was difficult. So this was a real fail-forward project. But there were also some great things about it, because it was also a breaking the waves project. We actually had funding for 5 years to just experiment. And we experimented with open source, open licensing, user engagement, collaboration across the sector. And we were one of the first museums and biggest institutions with the biggest amount of funding to actually do that. And this helped the sector put attention into digital development as a new and exciting and important field to care about. And it helped us come together as a sector. So in the evaluation of the project, one of our colleagues said that SMK has introduced a paradigm shift in the Danish museum sector by inviting us to collaborate instead of competing, and by opening up the archives and democratizing the collections. But bottom line is that we ended up in 2012 looking back at 5 years of development, realizing that this had been a very expensive pilot project, because we did all the mistakes, and after the 5 years, we had sort of, as an organization, okay, now we know what to do. But we had spent over $3 million learning that. And interestingly, some of the really great things that came out of SMK Digital were not in the original project description at all. So we started working with open licensing of our public domain collection. We started a conference called Sharing is Caring, and we started an important Wikimedia collaboration to put our open collections into Wikipedia articles where they are, just used and seen by many, many more people than ever come to our own domain. But this was not funded by Nordea. This sort of just started happening, and we spent just staff time on this. So based on all these valuable lessons, we tried to go on a second date with Nordeafonden. And this went on for 4 years. We did evaluations. They came back with a lot of critical questions to us, very valid questions. How did you even spend all this money on, and what did it amount to? And we were, yeah, okay, we can see that, but now we're smarter. And we did endless iterations on a new application. Over and over and over, we rewrote it, and we tried and tried to figure out what would be the selling point the second time around for the foundation. And they kept sending back the drafts and saying, no, that's not quite it. Okay. And actually, we tried very hard to come up with what we phrased as sort of the cherry on the pie or the icing on the cake that would make it look good for the foundation. But in the end, interestingly, the thing they wanted to fund was something else, and I'll come back to that. So why was it so difficult the second time around? Well, what we had learned going through the first project together is that a project as perceived in a project plan is nice and neat, like this Kandinsky painting that has been tidied up. But the reality of running a development project is more like an artwork. It's messy and it's full of loose ends. And this was a bitter pill for both the museum and the foundation to swallow. Because museums like sort of to know where we're going and to know what will come out of our investments, and that it will be a nice, neat, quality product in the end that we can be proud of, and that we won't be embarrassed to present to the public. Likewise, a foundation invests in something and expects a return on their investment. But with digital development, we have disruption, we have rapid change, we have perpetual beta. This doesn't go so well together. So that's what made it really difficult. But finally, in the spring this year, we went on the second date, a project called SMK Open. And just to come back to this the first date, we applied for approximately the same amount, but this time around, they cut down the amount they actually granted us. So they looked very, very closely at the application and said, yeah, we don't need this part, and you'll have to find funding elsewhere for this part, and so on. So a very different scenario from the first time around. But what was actually great about the way they granted money the second time around is that they went in very sharply and saw in our application, here is the basic infrastructure stuff, and this is what we're going to help you with. Get the infrastructure in place, and then you can do all the icing on the cake and the cherry on the pie afterwards. And they were spot on. This is what we needed. So we've come to a place with the Nordea Foundation where they're more than a funder, they're a value partner for us. They have forced our museum to take responsibility for what we had started with the first project. And they made it clear to us that it's necessary that we ensure operational costs and proper implementation of what we set out to do in order to obtain new funding. And as the hands-on people, we were actually thrilled that they said that to the managers, because it obligates the entire institution to take ownership of this. So I would say that this collaboration has really sharpened the museum's digital mission and given us agency. What is also great about this partnership is that it has been a mutual learning process where also the foundation has moved to a different mindset, a digital mindset, you can say. They understand and appreciate today that digital development is subject to rapid change, that we shouldn't focus on shiny products, but on the processes and getting the right people in place, that it can be really difficult to pin down what the return on investment will be, and that it's important to work very imaginatively, I would say, with how to measure the impact. Sort of the usual metrics we put in place are not enough. It's more viable to actually invest in the infrastructure. So in my abstract for this talk, I promised to say something about the hows and whys of maintaining a close collaboration with a private foundation. So just quickly to sum up. How to do that, I would say, is about building trust, and it's about being very patient in that process. So these endless iterations we went through was a very important learning process, both for the museum and for the foundation, in actually getting together in the end and going on a new adventure together where we are on the same page. This is, of course, done by a sustained dialogue and information flow and being very transparent and actually very honest about what digital museum development looks like and how difficult it is to write down in coherent sentences. So understanding the nature of digital museum practice together, and also very important to demonstrate that we might not achieve the results that we write down in the initial project plan, but the kind of iterative experimental practice will have impact for the entire sector, not just for us. And this had huge value for the foundation, because then their investment goes far beyond just one institution. And why? I think museums have a lot to learn from the approach of a private foundation who thinks in investment and return. And who thinks in a user-centered approach where it's about creating conditions for a better life for our users. And also because this mutual learning process that we as a museum has had with this foundation is of benefit to the entire sector. So with this, I'd like to hear from you. Thanks for all of you for coming to this tiny hyggelig session here. I'd love to have a conversation with you about your experiences with obtaining funding for these strange, unforeseeable digital development processes and what you've been doing. So,
thank you. So how many years is the second date, did you say?
Yeah.
4 years.
4 years.
Yes.
And then so what has been your feedback directly from the foundation as far as like, you have a pretty candid, open relationship with them at this point?
Yes.
You said you were sending things back and forth, but...
And you know, the defining moment where we... Sorry. Yes, good. Thanks, Christoph. The defining moment where we, as you know, the project team felt, hey, they have moved to a new level of understanding was the first meeting after we got the second funding. We sat down together with, you know, the director of the foundation, the controller, and so on. And we talked about, so yeah, now we're going to do this again. And we learned that it can be difficult to say from the beginning exactly what will come out of it and so on. But we have these sort of impacts in mind. And they said, yeah, no problem. We can sort of, we can tweak the project plan from like every 6 months. You just come back and say where it's going. They did not have that that approach the first time around, and we didn't know either. So that's been really, really cool. Yeah.
In those, I was going to ask, in those 4 years, did you ever go to, or think about going to, or actually go to other funding sources at any point, or would you just stick by your foundation?
We've had to go to other funding sources for different things because new things developed that was important to do in order to achieve the things we had promised the first foundation, actually. And I don't know if any of you were here in this room earlier today where there was a panel on funding models, and this seems to be a very normal pattern. So an important thing actually also to agree with a foundation on is it okay that we also obtain money elsewhere? Or will you will you have a problem with that? So great thing to get sort of into a contract that, yes, you museum can go elsewhere because things will occur where you need other funding streams. It's just unpredictable.
Perhaps you said it and I missed it, but how many people are involved, and did the foundation put some people on the project for you?
I think we are, it's difficult to say exactly how many people are involved because some people in the SMK Open project are paid for by the project and are project employees, but that's only a tiny fraction because the way we have implemented and anchored down the things we started with on the first date is actually to let permanent staff take responsibility for the different things that have been developed. So digital is all over the organization now, in every department. And then we try to sort of come together cross-department to do work together. So we're sort of infiltrating the museum, you could say. But that also means that there are a lot of people that don't spend full time on digital development, and there are pros and cons. And I've actually spent a lot of time trying to investigate what is the perfect digital organization you can have in a museum. And the answer is, so far for me, there's no perfect answer. There's so many different ways of doing this, and there will always be both advantages and setbacks. But yeah, we're sort of like 10, 15 people working a lot on this.
I noticed your title is Curator, and I'm wondering what your specific role was in the project, because you talk with a lot of ownership, especially in sort of digital transformation piece. And that's not usually something I hear from a curator, so I'm just curious what that's like.
I'll just repeat the question for the recording. So you asked about my title as a curator and how that plays in with having a role in a digital development project in a museum. It's actually a really good question, because it points to some of the changes that have happened in the museum due to the digital development processes we've been through. I'm an art historian by training. I don't have any technical background at all. I was hired to do classic art historical research, and then other people would put that online. But I got because I was on a sort of online collection project, I got interested in this whole field, and my role as a curator, researcher curator, sort of shifted in the process from curator of art collections to curator of digital museum practice. I came up with that title myself, actually, to try and pin down what is it I'm curating. So I'm a facilitator of reuse of our public domain collections. I'm a facilitator of wiki labs. And then I'm also, you could say, a curator of our policy and standards when it comes to what you can do with our collections. You can do everything. But I'm still placed in the curatorial department in collections and research, and that's the sort of infiltration point. That it's been important to have a classic art historian like myself do this digital development stuff, because that has sort of slowly but surely brought the curatorial department on board and made them feel safe about what was happening. If it had just been happening in a sort of satellite tech department, there would have been a war, I think. But hey, I'm one of you guys. I know my art history. Then it felt more okay. Yeah, sure.
I think what you said is the key. Getting curators on board is difficult as long as they get their kudos from traditional catalogs, writing catalogs and those types of things. And I was told by our director, well, when new young curators come in, they'll be more open to this. It hasn't been the case, because because they're still rooted in the art historical sort of paradigm, and we find curators who do have interest in, say, writing blog posts and dealing with those things, but it's not because age has nothing to do with it.
No, I think we're seeing, at least in Denmark, that more and more young people do sort of crossover educations. So they don't have just art history. They pair it with IT or social media marketing or business even, which is great, I think, because it lends that very important perspective of reaching out and letting it be valuable to our audiences and from different perspectives. But I agree with you that the classic art historians, I know from personal experience, you know nothing about serving an audience when you come from university into museum practice. It's learning from bottom up.
They're not taught that. If you've ever heard, if you've gone to a conference like College Art Association, you hear people talk, the language they use, it's still very meant to separate. I taught in academia for 23 years, and I reject that totally.
Yep. No, perfect.
We're out of time. Next one. Thank you, Moretta.